We have all of the greatest minds in pharma working on one problem. That has never happened in modern history.
And that's Neeraj Jain, co-head of Bain's healthcare private equity practice.
We need to solve this crisis as fast as possible, which means taking new approaches, right?
And that's Kara Murphy, the other co-head of the healthcare private equity team here at Bain. Healthcare typically has been viewed as really a safe harbor during a crisis. But what about a public health crisis? Neeraj and Kara have been in close contact with investors across the healthcare industry.
Everybody is focused on figuring out this one problem, which one gives me high confidence we're going to win this war against COVID, but it's also creating these collaboration models, which I think will have some permanent mark in this industry. I don't think we're going to go back to business as normal pre-COVID.
Today on the show, I'll ask Kara and Neeraj how coronavirus is disrupting patient care. What does it look like when patients shelter in place? And could the service models emerging today alter the course of healthcare permanently? I'm Hugh MacArthur, head of Bain's global private equity practice, and this is Dry Powder. Lots going on in healthcare these days. Is the industry in general really a safe harbor these days, or could it possibly be the eye of the storm?
It's a good question, Hugh. So most investors have been leaning into healthcare for the better part of the last decade. That is no different in the last couple of months as we have gotten into this unfortunate global health-led downturn. As you know well, PE returns have been outsized in downturns. But if you look at the data, which we have through our friends at CPRIS, you'll notice in the last downturn, healthcare returns outstripped all other sectors by almost a full turn. So here it was 2.7x versus 1.8x for non-healthcare. And so that is something that investors are keeping top of mind. We don't think it's going to necessarily be different in this downturn. If anything, you might see certain subsectors of healthcare having even more energy and momentum coming out of this current crisis.
Kara, how does it vary by subsector? I mean, that's a really large amount of outperformance that Neeraj was talking about. And I think about certain things like retail health investments where revenues literally went to zero at some dentist buildups because of the health crisis. It seems hard to imagine that every sector is going to do well. How do you think about how this varies?
Well, I think it's important to look at an investment through multiple time lenses, right? There's the what is happening here and now. Any physician practice that's disproportionately exposed to elective procedures, naturally they're down today. But, medium to long term, if anything, there's a continued trend towards consumerization of healthcare, towards having more healthcare in convenient facilities or locations. And so we will definitely see longer term swingbacks, right? So that's the provider space. If we turn to payers, it's a very interesting time for payers where, because of the delays in elective surgeries, payers are seeing a boon in their profits. You're even seeing some payers offering to potentially give some level of premiums back with the recognition that they've been the disproportionate beneficiaries in some ways of people foregoing some levels of healthcare so that the system can support all the COVID-related healthcare that we need. If we turn to, pharma and med tech, you're seeing unprecedented collaboration. And sure, you're seeing some short-term hits in certain things, clinical trials and the like. But at the same time, you're seeing an explosion in interest in kind of next generation solutions, whether it's data and analytics or the virtualization of research.
So what I hear you saying is that as long as you have the cash or the wherewithal to manage through this, whether you're a service provider under pressure on the revenue side, or you're a provider of equipment for elective surgery, or you're a hospital that doesn't get to do those high margin elective surgeries, as long as you have enough cash and wherewithal and cost levers to pull, that generally in most of these sectors, the recovery's at hand. Is that, Neeraj, do you agree with that?
I think that's right. The general sentiment I think that we share and a lot of clients also say is that, look, if you take a look at what's happened to the healthcare sector, even in public company valuation, it seems like people are painting with a pretty broad brush, and some of the discounting you're seeing both on the equity side, but also on the credit side may not, necessarily match with what the midterm performance of these companies are. So yes, of course, everybody was impacted in certain form and fashion over the last couple of weeks because of COVID lockdowns, but some of these subsectors are going to have just much more robust tailwinds than others, and there's going to be some real opportunities in this market.
Okay, so it seems like the prognosis for healthcare is strong. You both feel pretty confident in that, and that there are some underlying disruptive trends that we need to unpack that may be holding back certain investors and holding back certain sellers as well in getting deals done and putting properties on the market. So, Kara, just to continue this point, let's talk about an example. How quickly have some of these home-oriented healthcare services grown in the past few weeks?
So great question, and we should maybe even separate something like a telemedicine from a home. If you actually look at traditional home services and look at their recent quarterly performances, they've seen some volume dips, right? And that's a reflection of, one, people uncomfortable with somebody coming into their home, and two, caregivers and the companies trying to figure out what are the right protocols to make patients comfortable in the home, right? Contrast that with what we think will happen long term, which is a continued growth, significant penetration of home care-based services. I'll also contrast it with telemedicine, right, where pre-crisis commercial volumes for telemedicine were less than 10% of visits, right? Now we're talking about telemedicine being 80% plus of commercial visits. That is a striking change, and it's happened in the US. It's happened, frankly, across the globe. I think an open question with that one is, sure, there's going to be a new normal. That new normal isn't going to be 80 to 90%. It's probably going to be, somewhere in the middle of that 10% to 80%. And so as investors think about some of those trends, it's what is the long-term undeniable penetration curve that an asset is on or a sector is on? And are there blips that aren't going to be sustainable because of emergency measures put in place? And so how do I think about the short-term benefits, but also make sure I'm thinking about the right long-term trend?
It's really an astonishing number, 80% of folks doing telemedicine visits these days. Nirad, what does that story tell you about the pace of innovation in healthcare, either there and also in other areas that you're looking at?
Yeah, the pace of innovation in healthcare tends to be slow but steady. And it's not because the industry is complacent. It's just an incredibly complicated web of regulations, privacy, different ecosystem players. Every element of this and everyone has to be able to move in lockstep. One of the most positive things that has happened over the last several weeks is just a forcing of thinking about things in a different way. So getting folks to use telemedicine, you have to break a habit of a patient saying, well, the first place I have to go is a physical visit at a given location. Once everyone was forced to be able to do that through some type of video technology, it got everyone to open their eyes and say, maybe the first way that I'll enter the care funnel is actually going to be through a virtual visit. So you will absolutely see primary care practices as well as acute care hospitals say, I'm going to triage all the patients before they even come into my facility through a quick video visit. And I can decide if they should actually physically come into the facility. And why are they going to do that? It's going to be out of necessity, Hugh. The number of patients they can get through those facilities with new COVID protection measures, the amount of PPE that's going to be needed as people move through that flow just will take down the efficiency of that channel. And so what you want to be able to do is triage it up front. And so you'll use things like telemedicine as a technology in a way that you didn't use before. I think it's just one example here of just how you can instigate some changes in this slow but steady trend. So what we see today is not necessarily the new normal, but it does help instigate a new trend.
We've read a lot about global collaboration, obviously, on things like creating a vaccine to battle COVID-19. How is that changing the way the industry shares information writ large?
It's a great question. You're absolutely right that we are in unprecedented times where everybody says, how do we combine science and technology and collaboration to give ourselves the best chances possible to get a vaccine to help everybody, right? One great example we're seeing of that even in the industry is with a company, Certara, which is PE-backed, collaborating with the Gates Foundation, where the Gates Foundation has funded a consortium where all of the innovators are coming together, bringing their best experts, sharing data and sharing approaches with the thesis that by having all the best minds working on this, we are going to work smarter and we are going to get in solutions as fast as possible. You're also seeing a fair bit of collaboration between the big tech guys and some of the healthcare IT guys. Amazon and Cerner have talked about some data sharing initiatives in terms of bringing the best thinking or the best data coming out of the EMRs with the best machine learning and algorithmic approaches, right? And so what can we learn from that Obviously, COVID is a catalyst, but those approaches are going to have value much beyond COVID as we think about some of the very tricky diseases out there that everyone's trying to find treatments for.
Yeah, so just take drug development. The average drug development cycle is 5 to 7 years. It would be heroic for us to do something in a time frame that's shorter than that, but some of this is based on existing processes, and you see new technology coming in the form of real-world evidence that can be facilitated by technology players. Clinical trial virtualization services are going to play a much bigger role in the development of drugs, and all of these things can help make this process more efficient and effective. Again, it's a 5 to 7 year process. The average drug, you're talking about an investment now that's over $1 billion to bring it to market. People are really looking to public and private collaborations to help make this process more efficient and speed it up as well.
Neeraj, those are just mind-boggling numbers for a layperson like me. I mean, 5 to 7 years to bring a drug to market, $1 billion to bring a drug to market. Is there any way that the race for a vaccine here to battle the coronavirus can accelerate some of these clinical trials for other types of medications in the future?
I don't think we're going to go to business as normal when folks have seen the light of what does cross-industry collaboration look like? What does public and private partnership look like, where the government is playing some role, not just in the economics of development here, but also in facilitating some of these collaborations in multiple governments, not just the US government, but multiple governments around the world playing that role. The fact that everybody is trying to bring their assets to the table, as Kara was mentioning, that tech companies are saying, well, I'm not sure if this could be helpful, but here is a technology I have. Do you think it could be used in this phase of development of whatever product or solution we're talking about? I do think that we're going to see some experiments that are happening now that are going to lead to new ways of working for this industry permanently. There's some trends that are just going to be undeniable. Think of the basic fact that, hey, people are going to want more procedures and care delivered outside of the acute care hospital. We've been talking about this for years. So how do we move more things to ambulatory surgical centers? Because it's just a more convenient venue of care for the patient. It can be more cost effective. Gosh, does it warrant a rethink of which orthopedic and cardiology procedures can I continue to move into an ASC? So you'll see things like that. People getting care in the home, that's going to be an immutable trend. The use of more technology. If the crisis has taught us anything, it is information flow within our healthcare ecosystem is still a challenge for us. Fax machines are still a feature in this industry, unlike most other industries that we work in. And so there's going to be an increased role for healthcare IT.
You're saying we're still dependent on fax machines, Neeraj, in the healthcare system?
We are. It is a HIPAA-compliant communication channel in healthcare, and that's why it's still used.
Interesting. Technology goes forwards and backwards, I guess, in the healthcare industry.
Another one to throw out there relates to payments, right? Think about providers and the fact that they're facing liquidity crises right now. And 70% of a provider's dollars are coming from the payer and 30% are coming from the patients. And it can take a long time for the provider to collect either of those bills because there's a lot of complexity in the system. What exactly were the services that I'm billing for, and did I appropriately code and codify everything needed to get the appropriate payment? So imagine a future world where you're meaningfully accelerating both of those payments because you have data and analytics to figure out when the patient comes in, their profile, what they should appropriately be paying, and figure out a way to, get the right payment vehicle in there. And similarly on the payer to the provider side, we talked about the fact that the payers are large in scale and tend to have really strong balance sheets. And so what creative technology solutions can be used to accelerate the pace of B2B payments in a world where $500 billion of checks. So Neeraj talked about faxes. There are $500 billion of checks still going between payers and providers today in the healthcare system.
Just thinking about sharing of patient information at the patient's request between two providers. Today, that is an extremely cumbersome process that frankly sometimes requires files to be printed out and physically shipped, or just a denial of the patient's request and say that's just too complicated for us to do. So during this crisis, coming back to the fax machine example, There were hospitals that were faxing patient records to another hospital or care provider or to a government entity that needed that public health data because there were no pipes to be able to facilitate all of this information flow. So you can imagine just this role of IT and automation on, well, all of this information is actually flowing through a payer adjudication system because we're paying for all of this stuff. So this information is flowing through there. Why can't that be a pipe that is now utilized to be able to facilitate this type of information sharing?
That really resonates with me, Neeraj. I actually have been given paper copies of test results at one clinic and had to go to another medical facility and bring the test results myself. I guess the fax machines must have been down that day, but it clearly is an issue getting information from one point to another. On the next episode of Dry Powder, I'll talk with Neeraj and Kara about how private equity firms can confront a bewildering range of investment scenarios.
A senior private equity investor called me and said, Neeraj, how do we do a physical site diligence during this time? Do I deploy a drone over the manufacturing facility? Do I have somebody walk around with an iPad?
If you'd like to learn more about how you can tailor your firm's strategy to the COVID-19 crisis, email us at drypowder@bain.com. I'm Hugh MacArthur. Thank you for listening.